Grendel by John Gardner, a book with which I have a certain history. So, if you are not familiar with the name of John Gardner was a 20th century American author who died tragically early in a motorcycle accident in the early 1980s, I believe. And he was, while he lived, a pretty highly regarded author, I think. Maybe not quite held at the same level as like Philip Roth or John Updike, but he did seem, I think, to be a pretty highly esteemed writer. But since his death, his name seems to have kind of dropped out of the conversation, so to speak. He seems, to me at least, to be a little neglected nowadays, with this book, Grendel, being kind of the one work of his which does seem to still enjoy some kind of enduring popularity. And like I said, this book and I have a certain history because Grendel was one of the first, or it was perhaps the first encounter that I ever had with genuine adult fiction. I remember when I attempted to read this book, and I say attempted because I don't think I completed it at the time. I was in the eighth grade, I was in middle school, and I remember our school library had a copy of this book. And I picked it up because I was familiar with the story of Beowulf by that time. The tale of a man who fights with monsters, right? It seems like something an eighth grader could enjoy. So when I saw this book, Grendel, I recognized, the name of the monster from the poem Beowulf, and I was like, this is going to be cool. This is going to be a story about a monster, right? It should be fun. So I picked this book up and I started to read it, and whew, I mean, right over my head. Did not understand this book hardly at all. I was way too young to attempt reading this book. I quickly learned that I did not have a sufficient level of intellectual maturity to really engage with this book, or even to like comprehend what it's actually about, what it's really doing. So yeah, that was a false start, I believe, in the eighth grade. I don't think I ever finished reading Grendel at that point. But then one day, several years ago, I came across this book by chance in a bookstore, and it rang some bells, right? I said, that is that book that I tried to read in the eighth grade and didn't have a freaking clue what it was about. So of course I picked it up and I bought it, and I was like, I'm gonna read this book now. I think I'm finally old enough to perhaps engage with this book. So I bought Grendel and I read Grendel, and I was able to appreciate it at that time. And I did enjoy the book, but I still don't think I quite fully appreciated this book and just the extent of what Grendel actually does, because this book is uh, a deep book, and it is not a long book. It's not even 200 pages long, but it crams a lot into a little. And there was content that I don't think that I truly in fully grasped when I read this book in full several years ago. So after reading Beowulf, the original poem, I wanted to reread Grendel and do kind of a little companion thing with these two books. But having read Grendel now again, I was very, very impressed by this book. I see now that this book is truly a work of genius. It is genuinely a masterpiece. And I will, if I can, explicate why that is. So, if you don't know about the story of Grendel, Grendel is John Gardner's retelling of the epic poem Beowulf from the perspective of the monster. Now, if you know me, you'll know that I'm generally not the biggest fan of that kind of thing, that kind of sympathy for the devil type story where the villain is recast as the main character, and it's, kind of more sympathetic to evil. so to speak. But Grendel is an exception to that rule because John Gardner really does not do that. Grendel is not a hero in this work by any means. He is a much more articulate creature than he was in the original poem, much more intellectual and ponderous creature, but he is still decidedly villainous. And not just villainous in a physical sense, but also villainous in a philosophical sense, I think it could be argued as well. So the book is the first person account of Grendel and the events of the poem Beowulf from his perspective. Now, Grendel in this book is, like I said, much more articulate, much more thoughtful than the kind of mindless monster that is in the original poem. And this book is philosophical fiction, and it is philosophical fiction of the finest variety, actually. It is, in particular, an existentialist novel in the vein of like Sartre, but that should explain probably why eighth grade me was unable to really connect with this book because again it was just right over my head at that age. But the portrayal of Grendel in this is one of isolation and loneliness and philosophical questioning and yearning, and it really is an exploration of various different systems of philosophy. But beyond that, it is also an exploration of the development of human civilization, I think. And I think that that is kind of what I missed the last time I read this book. That is kind of, I think, what I did not fully appreciate is that Grendel is not just a retelling of Beowulf with a much deeper emphasis on philosophy. It is also kind of a survey of the advance, the march of progress of human civilization. In fact, I believe that John Gardner even said that what he wanted to do with this book was kind of subject Western civilization to scrutiny and kind of analyze it from a philosophical perspective through the framework of the Beowulf story and through the eyes of the monster in that story. So, to speak of the plot of Grendel, I mean, if you're familiar with the story of Beowulf, you'll probably have a good grasp of what the plot of this book is. Grendel is a monster who lives in the woods in a cave in Denmark, and he is very isolated and alone because he has a level of intellect which his mother, who's kind of his one companion, does not have. Grendel's mother in the original Beowulf is just kind of a monster without much depth, and she's also a monster without much depth in this book. Grendel is very intellectual, very articulate, and so he feels, very alone because he has no one basically. He's a monster. He's an outcast. He has no real society. But he engages in a kind of war with King Hrothgar, raiding the mead hall, killing the thanes, just terrorizing the land, right? But and then eventually fatally encountering the Geatish warrior Beowulf, which is kind of the climax of the book. And over the course of this story, various philosophical perspectives and systems are engaged with and explored, and that's really what the meat of the book actually is. So Grendel eventually, at one point, Grendel meets a dragon, and it's the same dragon, I think, that eventually kills Beowulf, but is also killed by Beowulf in the end of the original poem. And the dragon has basically an omniscient perspective. He is all-knowing. He sees the past, the present, and the future. And he essentially espouses a very nihilistic philosophical perspective where he's like, life is meaningless, just get rich, get that money right. There's nearly nothing more to it. And Grendel is kind of these are the ideas that Grendel is kind of engaging with, is that there is no real meaning to life. Again, it's an existentialist novel, that life is without meaning and we're kind of just dust in the wind, so to speak, right? And then also, Grendel watches the advance of Hrothgar's kingdom, and he also witnesses the birth of like art and religion, with the songs of a bard referred to only as the Shaper, who sings various tales of legends and heroes and such. And Grendel sees in this a kind of value that the world doesn't really seem to have on its own. Again, I'm probably not doing this book justice because it's kind of hard to explain just how intensive this book really is philosophically. But Grendel witnesses the rise of art and religion and culture, and he also watches the various wars and conflicts which Hrothgar engages in. And there's also some kind of like, there's also a sequence where there's some like ye old Marxist criticism of like societal power structures and hierarchy and classes and whatnot. This book is, I think there's a real element of anachronism to this, because it's engaging with very modern ideas in the setting of a very ancient story. So it is kind of anachronistic. But eventually, the book climaxes as it would with Grendel's fatal encounter with Beowulf, who is not named in this work, but who is Beowulf. And this is not only the physical climax of the work, but it is also the philosophic climax of the work as well, because the really genius thing that John Gardner does with this book is that he makes the battle between Grendel and Beowulf be not just a physical battle, but a philosophical battle as well. And the clash of their different philosophies is kind of the climax of the work in an intellectual sense. Grendel kind of endorses the dragon's outlook. I think that life is meaningless. It's all just random chance and accident. There's really no objective like value in the world. But Beowulf's philosophy, which we get in his dialogue as he's fighting and beating Grendel, is much different. And it is through this that we see kind of the essence of human conquest of the world, in a sense. Because Grendel is just like, there's really not much, there's no value, there's nothing, the world is just, it is what it is, it's just random chance and accident. It's just dust in the wind, like I said. But Beowulf endorses a much more idealistic anthropocentrism, is the best way I can put it, in which he is impressing his values on the world through his deeds. He's kind of depicted as like the kind of an ubermensch, if you will, that he does not endorse the same nihilistic philosophy that Grendel has kind of resorted to. Rather, he is much more proactive, and he is doing what heroes do. He is kicking ass and taking names, even though, because we're seeing this through Grendel's eyes, Beowulf appears very sinister. Like that's the thing, is that since we're seeing this through the monster's eyes, the battle between Grendel and Beowulf is kind of, our perspectives are reversed from the original poem, and Beowulf is depicted as a very sinister character. Grendel thinks that he is just flat out insane because his worldview is so idealistic and so anthropocentric, that man is the center of the universe, right? That it all exists by and for us, sort of. But the important thing to remember is that this is that outlook is what ultimately prevails in the book. And I think the message here is that Grendel, I mean, Grendel is still the villain in the book. Like, he is murderous. He slaughters a lot of people. He is misunderstood and very reflective, but he's still not a hero by any means. And that's why, again, this book kind of is the exception to that rule that I have, that I generally don't like those kind of sympathy for the devil stories. But Beowulf, even though, since we're seeing this through Grendel's eyes, Beowulf comes across as so sinister and foreboding, right? It is Beowulf who prevails ultimately in the end, and not just in a physical sense, but his philosophy prevails, because he is kind of the essence of heroism. He doesn't just think that things are random and accidental. He is a go-getter, right? He is proactive. He is making the world his bitch because he is impressing his own values onto it. Again, kind of that Nietzschean Ubermensch vibe with Beowulf in this work. So that's kind of just the overview of the book in both a narrative and in a thematic sense. And again, this is not a long book by any means. It is a very short book, but it's truly marvelous just how much John Gardner is able to get into this book and how well he is able to do it. Because, as always, to discuss the technical qualities of the work, this is an exceptional product. The writing in Grendel is hella good. It really is. John Gardner was a good writer. There's some really good lines in this. The prose, it's not hard to grasp, but I mean, it's not like overly flowery or anything, but it's still poetic at times. And also, there's some kind of like postmodern flourishes that he puts in here where things get a little bit odd at times. It kind of experiments with the narrative mode at points in the work. So it's definitely experimental in a way, but it's very well written. And the characters, well, I mean, it basically is just Grendel until the end with Beowulf. But the characters are, or the character of Grendel is very well realized. He is definitely an outsider, as he would be, being a monster that everyone fears. But he is so thoughtful, so ponderous, and his thoughts are thoughts that we still as humans can engage with. And ultimately, Grendel ends up embracing his status as monster because the dragon tells him that you are the way that the humans define themselves, that you are what the humans need to fully realize themselves and understand what their role is, what their function is. And so Grendel ultimately embraces his own villainy and kind of becomes the monster that they already think he is. And again, it's just another aspect of his character where he is just very philosophically oriented in his thought processes and the way that the book through him entertains these various different modes of thought. It's a very well realized depiction of character, very, very like intellectual depiction of character, but it's really good. And then again, when we get to the very end, when we meet Beowulf, that character is very striking just because of how threatening and ominous he really is. And of course, the story, like I said, it's not long, but it gets so much into its page count. Again, it's not just a retelling of Beowulf. It's not just a philosophical reflection. It's also kind of a survey of much of Western civilization. It is a book that really covers a lot of ground, and I found myself so very impressed with it this time around reading it. Once again, I don't think I fully appreciated this book the last time I read it, but I think I do now, or at least I do much more now. And I was really blown away by this book, by just how good it really is. So by awarding this book a full unqualified A+, that is truly how good this book really is, and just how impressive it is that it's able to do so much in such a brief page count. It is truly a marvel. It really is. So yeah, Grendel by John Gardner is getting a full A+ for me. That is how highly I regard this work. So Grendel, have you read it? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about the book, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read Grendel, this is a pretty strong recommendation from me. And I would definitely recommend it if you're into that kind of like existential literature, like The Stranger or Nausea, because this book is probably better than those books. I can't speak to Nausea, but it's damn sure better than The Stranger because that book is hella overrated. But Grendel is just an absolute banger. It is very rich philosophically and emotionally. It's quite poignant at times, honestly, especially with kind of how it ends. But also, it just does so much, and it does it so well and so succinctly. And it is, once again, just a truly remarkable work because of that. So, yes, I could highly recommend this book. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.